Right, welcome to the 11 a.m. July 7th Village Board special session. This meeting is called to order. And just to give anybody who is tuning in some context to this sort of unusual time and meeting and a very brief agenda, we used to, on a monthly basis, have a dinner session with just the Board of Trustees. And it was public, we publicly noticed it, but it was really just an opportunity for us to sit down without staff, without invited guests, and get through some things that we could figure out among the five of us so that we could make better use of our time in the public sessions with our staff. We have noticed that our village board meetings have somehow kept getting longer while we are in quarantine here and doing all of the virtual meetings. And so in an effort to have smooth running meetings on Wednesdays, we thought it would be a good time to have another one of our what would normally be a dinner session. Typically, there's a more relaxed agenda. It's an opportunity for the five of us to go around the circle and say what we've been up to with our various liaison work, or to figure out what we want to prioritize as the five of us, and then be able to give a more unified directive to staff when we come together with them in the meetings. So today we do have a few items that we want to update each other on, and we want to figure out. And the first one is related to police policy review and plan, and that came to us from the governor, the executive order 203, and I'll just look that up here so that I have it handy while we're talking about it. I really wish Rika would tune in. I really wish she would figure this out. So we are recording this meeting, but it's not going to be the same structure as our meetings normally are. So I had an interesting conversation I've spoken with both Stuart and Rika. I'll update everybody. And actually I had a conversation with the chief and sort of updated him on where we're at on what is the best way for us to fulfill the executive order, which is to do a complete comprehensive review of our police policies and then come up with a plan going forward for our community. It's something that should be guided by the Board of Trustees, working with the police chief and department and with community stakeholders. And then how we actually make that happen and make it happen quickly is what we're trying to figure out now, so that we can then more formally discuss it tomorrow with our staff and get a plan going forward. We, like every other municipal government in New York State that has a police department, have to figure this out in the next few months. So part of my conversation with Stuart was what that process looks like. It is professional services, so we're not going to go out with an RFP, which would really add a lot more time to potentially getting somebody on board to help us facilitate this. And so that brings up a couple of questions. Who are the best resources for us to reach out to potentially facilitate this? When the chief and I spoke earlier today, he just rattled off a really long list of who are all the stakeholders that would be there, and it's community organizations and the schools, and it's us, and it's the CPCRB, and but when we have these public discussions, sometimes you can hire somebody, and we experienced this with the housing needs assessment. If you hire a good consultant, they should be able to help us not like convene the meeting and help put out the word and figure out the best format for getting that information and soliciting the input, but then also collecting all of the input that they're getting and distilling that into recommendations that we may then be including in a plan, and figuring out what is our next step from there after an initial stakeholder meeting, and how does that eventually come into a plan, and then who writes the plan. Then there are any number of things that might be part of it. A piece of it that has there, and there's a list of from the governor of what are the types of things that we should be reviewing, in addition to just policies and deployment, but other practices, some of which our department already does, but the community may not be aware of it, or maybe there's even more things that we can be doing. So as far as resources we might bring in, it could be something like CGR Consulting that I forwarded that email to everybody. They've specifically reached out to communities and said, hey, we'd be happy to help your community with facilitating this process. And then there's also the fact that I don't know what sort of services they have as far as anybody who knows anything about law enforcement. The 5 of us on the Board of Trustees, we make up the Board of Police Commissioners, but we're not law enforcement professionals. So where do we have, do we just go to our own police department to be the law enforcement experts, which they are, or are there other resources we can bring in as well as a third party to help review what are our policies and practices? And so that's really what we have to figure out now. We kind of have to figure it out quickly because everybody else is doing this too. So the resources that are out there, anybody who's really going to be helpful is going to be in high demand. So that also encompasses some of what my conversation. Okay, so Rika's having trouble. She said she tried to get on in multiple ways. I don't know why it's difficult. So I'm going to send her the link again from. So putting that out there, that's reflective of my conversations with Rika and with Stuart. So what are your thoughts, anybody who's on right now?
I'll start. Thank you, Mayor. I guess what would be helpful for me is detailing the scope of the kinds of reforms, reimaginings that we are thinking of, considering the fact that kind of part one of this conversation following about probably a week or so after the murder of George Floyd, there was an email that you sent out to the community. The chief also sent out an email to the community that detailed not only the alignment to the 8 Can't Wait reforms, but also what are other ways that the police is responding to the moment. Subsequent to that, the governor came out with his executive order. And so now my understanding is that we're trying to reconcile those things. I guess it would be helpful for me to understand kind of where are we at that? Like, what have we already done so that we don't need to have this conversation, not have the conversation, but like what's already done and then what's on the table? What do we need to discuss to be in compliance? It's an open question. Also, you're muted.
I mean, essentially, we haven't had a stakeholder meeting, and we haven't figured out, are we bringing in any other resources to help facilitate those meetings? That's where we are right now. Otherwise, if we don't bring in any other resources, then our choices are for us as elected officials to facilitate all those meetings, take all that information, write a plan, and that is just, that is a professional service that is beyond what any of us, you know, not just get paid for, but maybe even beyond what is in our wheelhouse, or have the police department do it.
So, I'm not sure, Omar, I'm not sure if you were finished.
Free flow exchange, Manny, jump in.
All right, sounds good. No, is it, and I'm gonna agree with Victoria. I think I was doing a little bit of research in regards to the company, that CGRB company that sent out an email, and see what they were about. I think it's essential for us. As you mentioned, we are not law enforcement, obviously. You know, we can come in different backgrounds, and I think that's something that we do not have a background on it. And it will be helpful for us to understand the different perspective and the views of what this whole overall plan will be, and the organizations and the communications and just the write-up. I think it will be essential for us to hire someone in this regards to kind of help us put something together with the community. I think something that, you know, we do have is we have a foundation, which is the most important part. All the things and all the tools, we already have them. You know, so I think it will be a little bit easier for us in our community to kind of develop the next level plan. And what does that look like? You know, we'll see in a few months from now. But I think it will be essential for us to hire someone to help us and guide us in a lot of details that probably the 5 of us wouldn't even know, even with, you know, with the help of the police department. You know, there's things sometimes that is not a part of what we were thinking about. So I think my suggestion would be to hire a consultant to help us with this. And it doesn't have to be the person that reach out to us. I mean, we can look at other sources as well.
I'm not sure what the, and maybe Victoria, you can clarify this from a process perspective. Is it because it falls under a certain amount of money? Would it not qualify as needing to go under an RFP process? Or like,
it's not the threshold of money. It's professional services doesn't need to go under an RFP, but and that's true for all of a lot of the services. And just from a process perspective, Stewart is encouraging us to have an RFP process for even our long-standing consultants and legal staff going forward. And so that's something that I think in the new year we're probably going to do some RFPs even for some of the special counsels that we have. But those are it's sort of the mental way of distinguishing it is, services that we sign a year-long or multi-year-long contract with for an ongoing service. We should probably make sure periodically with an RFP that we're making the right choice and that it's a well-informed choice. A one-off, neither of them legally require an RFP for professional services. A one-off, particularly in something time-sensitive, going to an RFP is not only not required, but not even recommended. To help, you could just nod. Yeah.
But even if we don't have a formal RFP settled process, just clarifying like what it is that we're looking for in terms of the qualifications of the person or group, of the outcomes of that kind of thing. So kind of like a rough sketch of an RFP so that folks know on the front end what it is that we're looking for, and then we're able to judge against that when we actually do have respondents.
Right. And so one way to maybe go about that is because CGR did reach out to us and said, would you like a complimentary initial session, to schedule something as soon as possible to have Stewart, the chief, and a couple of us, and maybe Karen or Maddie be part of that conversation. And maybe that can help us define well, what is it we'd be trying to get out of somebody, and what would be the time frame, and then whether we go with CGR, and I'm just using them because they're the ones who reached out, but there's many other consultants who are perfectly capable of participating, then that might be a next step, and we can get that done this week. Rika has called in. She said, "Can you hear me?" I cannot hear you, Rika. Let me see if I can unmute you. You're automatically muted, Rika, when you come in. I cannot hear you, so I'm glad that you can hear us. But if you hear me now, see if there's some way to unmute yourself. Or, try and follow the link on the agenda. And it's always nicer if we can see you. And I'm surprised you're having trouble getting in. I hope that nobody else is. So the thing is, when we can talk to CGR. So there's really two types of support that we have to figure out if we want to have. So there's really two types of support that we're talking about, and that is having consultants that come and facilitate these sessions and get all the information and write the plan that may know nothing more than we do about law enforcement. Do we also want to, and this is something that's kind of difficult to find somebody, but maybe this chief and I were talking about maybe somebody from PACE who has criminal law enforcement as part of their studies, could be part of this process and could help us with their perspective and understanding from a law enforcement perspective, to help support the work of what the police department is doing and help the community recognize that, like, not only is our police department doing great work, but we brought in this outside stakeholder to help us with this review process. And I don't know if that's somebody that if they've got graduate students who are excited to do this and have this as a project that they do for free, or if this is a service that we need to pay for, or if there's a professor who's able to use this as a case study that he or she wants to use in their classrooms. So that would be the other potential. Rika joined us. Yay, there she is. That would be the other potential helping us with this. All right, Rika, so you had lots of things you wanted to say. Unmute your, I'm still not hearing you, Rika. We should be able to hear you. It says that you're unmuted. Oh, there you are. I hear noises. Is that you, Rika?
No, that was me.
Oh, shoot. It says that Rika's unmuted, so now I'm not sure. Maybe Rika, try putting on your headset. I don't know if it's a technology thing on your end, because I can't unmute you any more than you're already unmuted.
It seems like her phone is on as well. So maybe.
Yeah, well, she did try calling in with her phone, but that shouldn't be, that shouldn't eliminate her ability to be on here. Ugh. Yeah, she just texted me frustrated. Yes, I'm sure you are frustrated, Rika. I don't want to end this topic of discussion without Rika being able to weigh in, because I know I'm sure she has thoughts about how we can do this well. But what I'm taking away from it is that we should schedule a conversation with CGR to use them as potentially as someone that is a resource. All right, connecting to audio. Are you there, Rika?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Yes, we hear you now. Welcome again.
What the hell?
This is your third time that you joined us. So now we can hear you.
I actually was on early today and waited, and then like going, what the hell's going on here? Anyway, my only question was, what is exactly on the table that we are deciding on at this meeting? No, can't hear me.
I don't know how much of the meeting you heard. So what we're talking about now is going forward with bringing on a consultant to help facilitate the meetings, right, to help write up the plan, and how do we figure out who that consultant is and what we're asking of them.
Got it. No, I heard most of that, and I heard Omar talking about the RFP versus the special services and how that works, and having sort of metrics in place to understand who we want and how we want it to go forward. I just want to make sure that that's what the purpose of this particular meeting was to decide on that.
Yeah, I mean, the other things that we emailed that we can say publicly here for the record is what is the timeline, and most people aren't necessarily aware of it. By April 1st of 2021, every municipality has to, their elected body needs to approve the plan. So working backwards, we'll need time to get public opinion and feedback on the proposed plan and incorporate all of that. And so really we should have a plan ready to be shipped out to the public by the end of the year. I mean, I think we had January 15th as a date, but really by the end of the year it should be completed. But so what can we do between July 7th and the end of December, and to be able to do that well, facilitate the meeting with a long list of stakeholders, and what is an effective way to facilitate a meeting. And people who are professional facilitators, they may be able to help prepare, and this is the type of thing I'd want to find out, what would be a recommended approach? Because when the chief and I went through a list of the potential stakeholders, it's like a couple of dozen organizations that would be represented, between community organizations, elected bodies, if we're able to bring in somebody from a professor from PACE, a facilitator may say, okay, we'll start off with a general conversation, and then we'll talk about a couple of key questions, and then we'll go into breakout sessions, and then we'll come back, and that's the type of really constructive conversation that might make a 90-minute stakeholder meeting work well. That is the type of expertise we should be hiring somebody for. Again, that person may know nothing about law enforcement, but they may be able to get the information and really engage the public. And then what do we do with that? And how does that inform our plan? How many of those things do we have to do before we move forward with putting together a plan and putting that out to the public?
Okay. So is there a question of whether we should even hire somebody versus doing it in-house, or is that not even on the table?
I put it on the table because the question is, do we do it? Do the police do it, or do we hire somebody else to facilitate that And then the other question is, how are we able to find somebody, and do we want to find somebody to do a review from a law enforcement perspective, someone who has law enforcement knowledge beyond our own police department?
Right. I'm for all of the above. I mean, here's the thing. It's nice that our governor and all these politicians outside our village want things done. We have lots of stuff on the plate that is already like a huge load, and we're dealing with coronavirus, maybe a second one coming and re-coming and redoing things. It's a lot of stuff on a plate, and my vision about plates is you can't keep adding to a plate without taking something off. I think we're pretty efficient with our time. It's never perfect. It can always be better. What I like about an outside person or people is that this is what they focus on. And this is all they focus on. They're not doing it between, dealing with, the 12, or I think it's about 12 priorities we set up that we've already discussed. I don't need to discuss them, all of which are time consuming and require the same exact people. Seems to me that you get I said all of the above, because I think you should get somebody who knows how to facilitate really almost any project, right? That regards municipality, plus somebody, and we do have somebody who recently raised their hand for the police review board, who I think is an alternate, who does teach a lot about police activity and all that. And if they're able to do it, or somebody like that, you should have both sides of the equation. It's almost like, why wouldn't you? A good project manager who could do some consulting work at a reasonable rate, focus on it, ask the right questions, work with the chief, work with us, whether as police commissioners or BOT, work with the staff and move this forward so that it actually legitimately gets done, and ask many questions that we would have to call like special meetings every week on this one topic. Forget, we have to do the youth bureau, we have the DPW side, we have small business issues, and we have a dozen committees and councils that have sort of been waiting to speak to us, so we've appointed. So I just feel if you want to move something forward that sort of drops in left field, why wouldn't you, take that extra resource and take it seriously and do it? I also happen to like third party in issues that are highly political and emotional, so that people can be heard and that they don't feel that they're speaking to the wrong people. They want to speak to a third party because that party is neither right nor wrong. They are opinionless, they're totally, their job is to get something done in the best way possible by listening clearly to people. So it feels, since some of us, if not all, have so many commitments, that if we want to get something done in a timely manner, I almost have to say, why wouldn't we do it now? Whether it's an RFP so that we can do a wider net, I have no problem with that, to do a wide net. The only issue is because there's a clock ticking and the month of December is dead, because November and December for us, because that's when all the budgets are done. That's when the staff's really busy. This year is going to be a real challenge. If you want to get something done for December, I don't know. I feel like an RFP is fine if we could do it quickly. It might be just a wider net of people that we might get that we otherwise wouldn't.
So the one that we mentioned is the one that emailed us, but I think we can schedule a conversation with them, but then maybe people to ask about suggestions for other consultants that have that skill set. Why don't we just ask Karen and Maddie what are their thoughts? Unless somebody can think of, Kevin Dworka and his team, I thought they did a really good job in facilitating their meetings. So that might be somebody, depending on what he's working on right now, from just a meeting facilitating perspective.
And we also know that he has bilingual capabilities. We know that he knows the village. We know that he is accredited across many, many studies. This is not like, so that could be, I didn't know if those consultants were offering to do it for free is the question I had. I didn't understand whether it was free or for pay.
I'm sure it was not for free, Rika. I'm sure.
Okay, so therefore they could be included in the RFP.
Right. But I'll reach out to, so this is what I hear as next steps. Scheduling a time to meet with CGR and getting some insights into them on what they, might recommend or could provide. And because they've reached out to us and said, we'll have a free session to talk about it. So let's take them up on that. And then talking to Karen and Maddie about who are some of the other consultants that they would recommend. We think Dworka could be a good one. There's probably somebody else that we haven't necessarily thought of. And let's get that underway this week. But we're going to have this conversation in some form, at least a recap of it tomorrow during the work session, so that the public knows that this is underway and that we're going to be reaching out for feedback. But exactly what form that takes beyond having an initial stakeholder meeting is unclear. But I know that there are a lot of community members that have reached out to us and said, what are you doing? And they're going to want to know not just that we're doing something, but they may want to weigh in. And do they want to weigh in before we have a plan for them to just respond to? So I don't know what the consultants would recommend.
Well, and I think that when you say we should be speaking, do you want to just be the BOT, or do you want to include the chief and the village manager so that
you mean in having a conversation with CGR, and you mean having those conversations
anybody else
with
that answers the RFP? Yeah.
Exact. I think it should be two of us and the chief and Karen and Stuart or Maddie. Does that make sense? Is there somebody I'm not thinking of, or is that too many people?
Well, I don't know. It just seems like we're saying, everybody that's spoken, we're sort of saying yes. I mean, yes, we should do a third party. Yes, we should. It's just the metrics becomes an issue of what are you looking for. I don't think in who you hire as the third party needs a public involvement or stakeholder, because I'm not sure how that would work. Okay.
No, that's not necessary, I don't think.
Right. And we would have to open this up. So, my issue always about the stakeholders is we constantly look at groups as if groups are representative, which many of the 501(c)s are not representative. They're representative of their boards and of what they do and their missions. But we have to find a way to actually include the public, and the public who is unaffiliated. Is the way I look at it. Just the constituents don't reach out to us, just people. Now, if they're working, they're too busy, okay, but we have to at least try to reach them, because the professional staff who gets paid in these mission-driven community organizations, sure, they have a lot more time and availability, but that's not really all of our constituents, or even a cross-section of the constituents. So maybe a third party like that as part of the RFP, to Omar's point, maybe that's something we can actually bring up, is how do you engage those folks? Doing it bilingually would be helpful. Maybe some of them can do it, some of them can't, we don't know. So to speak to your metrics comment, Omar, I was just jotting it down since I couldn't talk. These could be some of the things we ask for. I would really love to get somebody or some people who are both understanding of police procedures and all that, and understanding of consulting and projects and how one engages the public. That would be ideal for me.
Okay. All right, so I'll move forward with reaching out to staff about scheduling some of these initial conversations, and who else we should be reaching out to. It'd be nice to have at least 3 different firms that we are able to have conversations with. And at this point, some of them may be overextended, so we may need to, look more broadly on who could even be, consider taking us on, and then schedule the meetings, and then find out who all is among us is available to attend these initial conversations, and then get some quick proposals and decide who to move forward with. And we need to, part of that initial conversation, the first one that we had, which I was just suggesting CGR because they reached out and so they're saying that they're ready to do this, is for us to, if we just say, hey, what should we do, and get proposals that are all over the map with different ideas. I think Omar's original question was, what are we asking of them? Like, the benefit of an RFP process is that we sit down and say, okay, this is what we want. We want the engagement to look like this. We want these to be the milestones that we're achieving. And because we're doing this so fast, we don't, and we're not exactly sure what it's supposed to look like, because we got this 3 weeks ago, and now we have to finish it in 5 months. That initial conversation might be something that we can then be able to have more of more clarity, so that when we go out to the other consultants, we know sort of what we're looking for. And unless they say, yeah, I think you're not considering this, like, okay, then let's consider that if we want to.
Again, it's supposed to be a plan that is submitted by April 1st, right?
The plan has to be ratified by the board by April 1st. So
right,
the initial draft of the plan really needs to be done months earlier.
No, I understand, but it is a plan. It could be an outline. It's not very specific what the plan is. Like the government in doing this didn't say, and there'll be grants or budgets or anything like that. So every municipality, it seems to me, is doing sort of the same project, highly inefficient as far as I can tell, because every single municipality now is doing something. I guess the belief is that we're all different. Every municipality is different, and there's some truth to that. So I guess there's really no parameters that were given for exactly what it should look like. We have to create this ourselves, is what I'm understanding, unless I'm wrong about that.
That sounds right to me. It's a similar circumstance to schools, for example, how the government has not yet come out with specific guidelines, and they're looking for municipalities to give their kind of local details and figure it out from there. But I'm also curious, and I don't necessarily want to follow up with a conversation, I just want to name an interesting thought is, what about communities like Mount Kisco that have county police, and what would it look like for them? Does that to the county so that they don't have to do it at all, or I don't know what that looks like for them?
That's a really, really good question. I was sort of going down the path is, wouldn't it be sort of nice if we, let's say, coordinated with Peekskill or something, but oftentimes that makes things much more complicated, many more people, many more nuances. And sometimes you have to do the XY axis, where where perfect is the opposite of good. Sometimes you have to look and say, if we want to be done by this point in time, we need to be very focused on this, and we need to figure out what may not get done somewhere else because of it, or how much work we have to put into this versus trying to work with other communities. But it seems from a county resident point of view, I'm not just in Ossining, we all also live in Westchester, not the most efficient sort of request by government, because all of us now have to sit and do separate pieces without learning from one another. Maybe that comes afterwards. Maybe once we have the plan, there might be some coordination at that point, and maybe that's the way to look at it. Okay, so I think it's the metrics part that might be a little bit, it always is, like setting up the RFP correctly or the request correctly in the way we want it is sort of important here.
Okay, so I'm going to set up or ask to have a meeting set up with CGR as soon as possible. I mean, ideally, it'd be great if we could have it before tomorrow night, because they have some sense before we meet tomorrow night on a little more clarity. But I'll just review for people what's being asked of us.
Mm-hmm.
The plan is presented for public comments to all citizens of the locality. After consideration of the comments, the plan is presented to the local legislative body, which is all of us, which shall ratify or adopt the plan by local law or resolution. Actually, that's not me, that's you guys, because that happens in by April 1st, probably next March. But the last bullet point is, the local government shall transmit to the director of the Division of Budget of the state, I assume, that the process has been completed and the appropriate law or resolution has been approved. Appropriation of future state funds may be conditioned upon receipt of the certification. So really what they're saying is, you better do this, or we might withhold money from your municipality, which is not our motivation for doing it, but it is a good reminder of, I think it's just an indicator of how seriously the governor wants us to take it, even if it's a little bit unclear exactly what it is we're creating. Right.
I just have a little problem with the wording, because I don't want us to get caught up with in a word battle. I'm surprised they use the word citizenship and your citizens rather than residents. in there, and I don't want that becoming like an issue for us. We all understand it means our residents, right?
Yes, we all.
And we're gonna make that clear, even though that's not how it's actually written by the governor's office.
Yes, well, we have to assume that he means citizens in the broadest term, not in an actual what passport
Right.
can hold. Right?
It's just that sometimes people get caught up
Yeah,
with
I don't
words,
use citizens
and then
for some
nastiness
reason.
comes
Yes.
out that really is unnecessary.
Agreed. Okay, so we do still have two. Oh, you know what? Before we move on, Chief, I know you said you were just listening today and you'll be at the meeting tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry we didn't give you more notice on that. I just assumed that we were reaching out to you. I should have done it, give you more notice to be able to participate tomorrow. Now that you listened to this whole back and forth, before we move on, do you have anything you want to say for us to be mindful of before tomorrow night?
I mean, I'll try to be brief, but I mean, I think that a consultant is not necessary. I think that if we really want to build trust between our residents and the police department, and you have a police department that's open and willing to take on the difficult tasks and have the difficult conversations to engage with our residents, I dare to say that our police department is light years ahead of many other police departments. Number one, we should not share this with any other department because that would be a step backwards in most cases for us. We have an opportunity to move the ball well ahead of where we are, and I don't want to be held back by the lowest common denominator in any case. Not that there aren't lots of great police departments, but I know where we are and what our specific needs are, and that, as Rika said, is very, very complicated when we add others into the equation. You know, the police department stands ready and willing to have all these conversations, to facilitate all of these conversations. We have staff that are appropriate to hold those conversations. I would venture to say that Kevin Dwarka is a land use person, and I don't know how he would factor into this.
Right.
I'd also say that this entire program is being put on under the theory that police departments have done it wrong in the past. So you have two options for a consultant. You can go get what would be purported as a law enforcement expert, which would be somebody with a long history of experience, which by definition of this project would be the person who caused the problem in the first place. You know, the way I look at our police department, the people that are here now, this is a newer generation of police that has, you know, the vision to see this thing through. You know, it's unfortunate that it's being labeled as reform. There are departments that need to be reformed. Our police department does not need to be reformed, but we certainly could use evolution. There are ways that we can improve and things that we can do better. But I do not, you know, reform implies that this has to be torn down and rebuilt. That's not the case in Austin. We need to be improved. We need to evolve. We need to come up with the next evolution of what policing is going to look like. And I think engaging the community is the way to do that. That said, it sounds unanimous that the board intends on hiring a consultant. So we'll be here for whatever our part of this project is when the board is ready.
I don't think, have we heard from Bob yet? I don't know if we've heard from Bob. Or if you have anything to say.
No, no, you haven't heard from me. I understand both sides of it. I think Kevin brings up a very valid point. And I think should be a discussion with us as far as how we want to move forward with this. I totally get it. And he's brought up some very valid points that I don't think we were fast to just reach out to somebody instead of actually talking to him and having that conversation. So I think that's a conversation that needs to be had. That's where I'm at with it. I'm not in favor or against the consultant right now. So because of what was just brought to light.
Okay. Who else?
It's a good question. So I'm 5149 consultant. The reason being that you take, for example, like we have a very capable finance department, but we still have outside auditors that come in. And the idea being that the third party can provide a level of, I want to say authenticity, but authenticity is not the right word, but like, if what we're discussing is having kind of community conversations led by someone about the police department, then I think that having conversations that are led by the police department in the past has actually been proven to be quite effective in some ways. And I've also heard examples of folks that have felt like if the police are leaving the conversation, they may not feel as comfortable to say what they want to say. I think that given that I'm 5149 consultant, that's where I am.
So if I could just answer that real quick. So Omar, a couple of things to think about. Number one, the underlying theory here is that this project is being put on in order to develop trust with the community. And, you know, look, I can't, I've said before, I'll say again, I cannot answer for every police department on earth. I can't answer for what happens there. I will not take responsibility or credit for their good work, but I will take all the responsibility for the things that happen here. You know, my philosophy is that if we want to build trust in the police department, then we have to be able to show our community that the police department is willing to lead this effort and to guide people to where it needs to be. That's not to say that there isn't value in having outsiders leading in certain discussions, and this is going to have to break out into subcommittees and things like that, and different meetings. You're not just going to have, you know, a dozen gigantic meetings. Nothing ever gets done, or people don't get to be heard in really large meetings. I think that Austin has a really unique opportunity here for the police department to step up and for the government to say, look, this is our trusted entity. And I think that when you have something that's labeled as reform in a place that's already doing most of the recommended things, and in terms of outside audit, we already have that. So the policies and procedures that are supposed to be reviewed have already been signed off on, not only by, they're already in line with the MUTCD, which is the Municipal Police Training Council, but also we've been New York State accredited for like 15 years now. So every quarter we have a review with them, and every 4 years we have a full-blown on-site audit of all of our policies and procedures and proofs that we've been up to date with those year over year. So in terms of policy and procedure, we already have an outside audit that comes in, and I think that at least for my vision of this, the outside third-party objective auditor in this is the public. So in other words, what we're looking to do here is bring the public in order for them to be that outside third-party objective vision. So that's my thought. Look, I'm not going to argue that you know the board has to do something. You folks are elected to make decisions, and I respect that. But you know that's my position as the police chief.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to reach out to CGR and find out some other facilitators, because what we're really talking about here is how do we engage the public? How do we engage stakeholders, have these conversations? And I think that's step one. And we can talk about it again publicly tomorrow. Chief, I think it is important for the public to know that we have confidence in our police department and for them to have confidence in this process. And I hope that you can find a way to have confidence in this process as well, because we need you to be a partner in this, even if it's not the way that you would have designed it.
May I just put my 2 cents, I guess, on this? Kevin Dorka, his name came up, sure, and kind of go back a little bit, and you're 100% correct, Kevin. He's totally different consultant of what we thinking of looking for this particular case. But one of the things that I can always kind of go back and say this with very confidence. Kevin Dorka is one of the best consultants that I've been part of it in my time in the board. That being said, the reason why I'm saying that is because he actually brought up, he was a very fair consultant in regards to the engagement in the results of what the recommendations at the end of the day was. And I think that was a valuable information that the board had in mind, having a third party come in and be very, very focused on what the pros and cons of a lot of the things. And so I think in regards to hiring a consultant or potentially hiring a consultant to help us with this process, I think that's what we are looking for, because as you know, there's a lot of things that become very controversial and different now in times of days, where I think some members in the community, they're going to feel that they weren't listened to. We didn't hear their point of perspectives, and we didn't address this. When I say we, I'm talking about everybody in sort of in a Zoom call. So I think having someone that can help you, and I'm not saying that they will take over this. I think it's a partnership between the police department and them and us. And obviously you as a chief be able to be ahead of at least my perspective will be for you to kind of help us guide this process, because you as a police officer, as a chief of our village, know more than anybody else, and knows our community better than any other consultant will come in and try to gear up. But I think there's objectives that sometimes we need to see, that sometimes we don't not see it. And definitely kind of going back to Kevin Dorca's study, there was a lot of stuff that I didn't see it until it was actually in black and white, and actually reading classes and what the conclusions were and his recommendations. And I was able to realize, what he meant with the results of his study. So I think it will be valuable for us to consider that at the same time, not for them to do the whole study, but to partner with us to help us, guide us as a third party, unbiased person that doesn't know the village, and in a way doesn't have any interests, but the best for the results on what this has to be. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on that.
Okay. I think we're on to next steps, because I think we've.
Oh, I was
sort of-
talking to no one. I was on mute. Sorry.
Oh, I'm
So,
sorry. I was,
no,
I
just
was
realized
surprised, actually. I thought it was me again.
No, I was talking to myself. So we do have 2 other items on the agenda. So it sounds like everybody's gotten to say what they need to about this, and then we'll pick it up again tomorrow. And as soon as we're able to have schedule any conversations with consultants that might be good facilitators for the public engagement, public outreach portion of this, we'll go ahead and schedule those for as soon as possible, and try and get all those 2 of us and the key staff members that we talked about to give us to participate, at least in the initial one, and then get some proposals as soon as possible is the direction that I'm hearing. We are going to have executive session. I definitely have something to bring to everyone's attention, but there are 2 other items. One of that Rika wanted to talk about, which is constantly evolving, and then I wanted to update folks on a conversation that I had with Stuart. So Rika, you asked to talk about the Sing Sing Prison Museum. You and I have spoken about it.
Right.
Sandy and her office are still getting paperwork and language to Stuart so that he can even have the right language for us to be able to vote on something. So let's first talk about it, just assuming that we have the resolution and it is eligible for us to be able to vote on it tomorrow. We got some legal opinions we weren't anticipating that in the last week. And, we still have, there's a lot of considerations and a lot of people involved in this. Rika, how do you want to phrase it? Go ahead.
I wanted to bring it up, but after the legal opinions, I now feel it needs to go into tomorrow, into legal matters, not in this session, before we can actually discuss, because I think the legal issues that were brought up actually require a conversation. I don't think this is the appropriate forum. I don't know how you feel about that, but I feel silly having this conversation and then the legal discussion. I think the legal discussion has to occur first. Does that make sense to you?
The legal discussion is, we've been given advice. The advice is, don't move this forward. And the advice is based on, lawyers and managers, their job is to minimize risk. And the best way to minimize risk is to not take any. And I think there's a lot of other considerations here for us as the elected body. And what we're being asked to do, as we heard from Sandy last week, is to have this as one of the options for consideration if it can work. We haven't signed anything. In fact, we haven't signed a lease, which everybody thought we were going to sign, because we started asking some really hard questions, and none of us want to do anything that's irresponsible or uninformed. And unfortunately, some of the folks we had in village staff previously weren't looking at it carefully. And so we're benefiting from the risk-averse folks that work for us. And we should take all of their recommendations into account as far as really understanding what we would be exposing, what liability might be there that we didn't previously understand. And the advice that we got from Tom Geiger is that at least at this stage, it appears to him that a lot of the same concerns we had regarding the lease are still exist with the conveyance of the property, and it's two things. It's the way that the building was paid for by bonds makes it very difficult. It is not set up to be able to pass the liability of anything to do with that project onto the museum, that the liability would rest with the village, because of the way that the building was funded initially and continues to be funded. And I'm not an expert on state bonding of their properties, but apparently that's a very complex issue, and that's part of the reason we brought special counsel on to help us understand that. Then part two, which we may have more ability to be able to negotiate, is the liability that comes with fronting the money and then waiting to get grant money back from the state. Though it's unusual for a grant to not come through. Right now we're in unusual times. So is there a way for us to have a relationship, have an agreement with the Sing Sing Prison Museum that could protect us, where it's not the taxpayers necessarily fronting the money? And that's what we haven't explored at all. And that's what I'd like us to be able to have the option to explore. And what we heard from Sandy is that while they're taking up local laws of this kind in the coming weeks, they may not again until next year. And so the idea is, if the paperwork can be ready for tomorrow night, that we keep this on the table. Meanwhile, the people that Karen has already reached out to the county and has already spoken with the county as a possible alternative, where the village wouldn't have any liability and it could just go right to the county. That's almost 1 million people rather than tens of thousands who would be bearing any sort of liability. And that might be a great alternative, but they are just now beginning to start talking about it. If they can make that happen, and the people who are trying to encourage us not to take any risks are very much encouraging that conversation to happen. If that can happen, then that's terrific. If it can't, then we should keep all of the options open. And that's the conversation we had last week. And that's still where my mindset is at. And we hire attorneys to give us advice, not to give us direction.
So thanks. I mean, I opened up statement, but you sort of took it to, I think, a great place. I would take it a little more top line. And just for the record and for the newer trustees, 2-3 years ago, Manny will tell me exactly when it was, we were presented with the Sing Sing, with the museum. We are all for moving forward. We think every board member I know, and I think the more recent ones as well, are very supportive of having a museum. It's a phenomenal thing. The idea is fantastic. It's great for tourism. It's great for the future. It's about social justice. There's a lot of great stuff. When we agreed to some things in the past, it was based on commentary that sort of really implied that we were a pass-through as a village, so that the museum, the group, could get significant grants from government. And that was what we signed off on. As we see now, a couple of years into it, it's not that we're a pass-through. Actually, we wanted to get an attorney and a second opinion, and it turns out that it's much more detailed than that. And in the detail, as always, are significant obligations, potentially significant obligation to the village, and the concept that if you don't like what you get, you could always give it back to the state. A lot of these kind of comments that have been coming up really makes some people, and the right people, because as Victoria said, it is the staff that has to look at risk and liability. We're not in a position, a small village, unlike the county, that can take on so much risk on one initiative. Remember, we have lots of initiatives. We take bonds and other things. It's the same story. If you put all your eggs in one basket, that's not the most responsible thing to do from an administrative or a political point of view. It just is not fiscally responsible on one hand. On the other hand, we believe in the initiative so much, and we understand it's a long term, and that every step, a couple steps forward, maybe a step backward. So I think everybody's doing their job, and it's something, Victoria, because we've been attending some meetings, I wanted to share with the rest of the board, is actually the right thing to do. I'm supportive of moving forward, but I do want to impress upon everyone that who's listening to this and as we record it, that the devil is in the detail on this one. We are going to have to really look at contracts really carefully. This is a great example of why when everybody's so busy doing their daily functions that sometimes you do need a third party to come in. It's a great example of somebody looking with a fresh pair of eyes who has some expertise in this field, in the legal field, who is asking lots and lots of questions and has some issues where the village has some liabilities that we're going to have to consider very seriously whether we want to bond the way it's suggested. My feeling is we should go forward, but I have to say that it has to be under a microscope, and that as we move forward, the organization, the museum itself, is also going to have to, I think more clearly about the next steps being about operationalizing their organization, about having data, about having a professional CFO, a professional COO. I work in a not-for-profit for the past year. We cannot get a grant for IT unless we have an IT professional, not just somebody with the IT title, an actual professional IT person. I had shared that with the mayor. These are the kind of safety valves I think responsible leaders need to put in place. And that is something that I'm going to push for, because people have great ideas and great intention, but we have a fiscal responsibility, and that's a big concern. And I think the village manager and corporation council are doing exactly their job. And now we have to just be aware that and take notice from today that this has to be under a microscope. These contracts, these agreements, the conversations have to be very well understood. That's in addition to what the mayor just said. I don't want to repeat what you already said. I wanted to add that piece into it, really for the record and for our colleagues on this call to stay focused. This is what I meant earlier by how many large initiatives are on the plate and how much energy each of them needs and how important each of them are. And that goes back to why sometimes for a very short period of time, hiring a third party actually moves things forward. And I see that as a positive. So that's what I wanted to sort of bring up. And which two trustees or one trustee I'm involved in it gets involved with this initiative is also something to be taken into account as we talk about the other initiatives as well. So it's not always the same two people, that it's spread out a little bit. So that's, I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I just wanted this on the agenda to bring that because it's coming up tomorrow.
Anybody else with questions or comments on this?
That update is helpful. So it sounds like now we know. Okay, un momento.
Is she getting a vote? I just want to know.
Do whatever Eliza tells us.
Sí o no? ¿Estás a favor? I don't know. We'll find out. If we have what we need at this point to move forward, it sounds like the biggest thing is finding out which of the two, identifying which two of us will be kind of liaisons to this. Is that right? Is that where we are?
No, I'm already a liaison, and the mayor, I think, was until now. Were you a liaison or ex officio or something?
No, the way that their bylaws are written, the mayor is inherently an ex officio member of the safety board. So that'll be you next year, Rika.
Okay, so then we'll have one more person if somebody wants to join that conversation, but we are still going to be voting on things related, and I want to make sure people are comfortable with that.
Just help me understand that, Victoria, is actually at the next ex officio, there's no liaison for this particular, it's only one person of the board, correct?
There's not always, but I did appoint Rika to be the liaison this year.
No. I understand that. And it was the reason why I get that. So no, I'm actually in favor of this whole project. I've been always supporter of this project. And you know, one of the things that, you know, I'm going to agree with Rika, is something that we have to keep in mind and have the details of this whole project, because it has become very complex on some aspects of the project. I think maybe within a month, I don't know how the work sessions are, but it's been a while since we had any update from Jerry or if there's somebody else that from the CNC Museum to come in and actually kind of give us a rundown on what has happened on, you know, the past few months with the pandemic and everything else, and what are they looking forward to the next few months. I think it will be essential for us to get an update from them as well, not just, different emails that sometimes we get. And I think it's important for them to come in front of us, since that we're going to be, again, we're going to be having this discussion tomorrow and potentially, having vote on in favor of this process with the change of the language and everything else. So I think is something that we need to have in our work session.
Okay, and now that I'm reassured that that child is not eating glue and that is just a squeezy food. Okay, yes, thank you. I thought she was, it looks like glue to me. The one thing I would say about that, Manny, we do have some pretty hefty work sessions coming up, but also here's the thing with the Sing Sing Prison Museum. They can tell us a beautiful, wonderful, compelling story about the mission and the programming. And Rika and I both participated in recent Saturday morning.
Friday night, Friday and Saturday.
Yeah, so that we're just discussing it from, what are we really calling this? And what is our commitment to this as a center for justice, not just the history of the museum? And what does that look like? And how do we engage with the public? So we can invite them to have those conversations all day long. And that is, that is what makes it such an exciting project to want to support and to want to volunteer for. That's why so many of the board members are part of it, and that's what will get the community excited to want to be part of it. And that's the reason why I want to keep that end goal in mind as we try to find a pathway that is also responsible for us as the leaders of this community from a financial liability perspective. The harder questions, which are not as conducive to nice presentations at a work session, really is what Rika was talking about before, which is what are the financials? Who's responsible for helping, for holding the museum accountable and protecting the village? And what is the structure that's in place? They have an amazing structure in place from a museum programming perspective. Some of the challenges that need to be addressed in a very real way that may not be able to be addressed. We can come back and report. They should come back and report during village board meetings progress that's made. But if there's going to be any sort of a management agreement between the village and the Sing Sing Prison Museum, that's what needs to be figured out. That's not in place right now, and that's more than just a work session update. That's some pretty serious conversations and negotiations with our attorneys and theirs, and those are the conversations that I'd like us to be able to get to see if that can work. Rika, yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, my thoughts are that it's really the ball is in our court, since we're not just a pass-through, and we're very concerned, and I think village manager is right about grants. A lot of them are just being cut. If they're not in somebody's blood, it ain't happening for the next 18 months or 2 years because there's no money, and there are many issues that need money, many initiatives and many human beings. So realistically, there's a concern about grants that used to be a sure thing aren't such a sure thing if they even exist. So now the onus is on us because we're no longer just a pass-through. We actually are going to be holding the bag here in some ways, excuse my colloquialism. And I think it's our responsibility and our staff's responsibility to create a list that says, this is what we're holding you responsible for. This is what we need to see you do. And this is what we need if we can continue together. But I think what Sandy was asking for is simply like, let's open the door to be able to do that. And exactly. I am okay with saying, yes, I'm interested in opening the door, understanding that doors open and doors close. Doors don't just open, and we all hope that the new trustees will sort of not realize things. No, I want it for the record, which is why we're bringing it up today. Doors open, doors close, doors open a little bit and they open a lot. And that's how I'm looking at it. So I want to move it forward with that understanding.
Okay.
And we do expect staff and legal to say, this is what needs to happen, with the understanding that if it doesn't happen, or that the group doesn't have enough money to make it happen, or can't find a funder to make it happen, then the project slows down or it doesn't happen. That partnerships are actually partnerships. That's actually how they work. And that's what this is really now coming down to, which is, I think, fine. I'm up for the challenge.
Okay, so I'm looking at our time, and we've this is a midday meeting, and I definitely want to be out of here before 12:30. We have an exec session. So, but we are going to have a vote. Presumably, the paperwork will all be cleaned up by tomorrow night. So we will have a vote. It sounds like Rika and I mean, you have heard of us acknowledging the concerns that need to be addressed, and our desire to keep that door open so that we can have those conversations. The trustees who've been less involved, are you comfortable with supporting the home rule message so that that door can stay open? Or do you have more questions that you need to? So I see Omar, or do you have more questions you want to, have us be ready to address tomorrow night before we cast that vote?
I'm good with it.
Okay. All right, that's most of us, Manny, but is there anything that you want us to be prepared for before tomorrow night? Or you're okay with this minor step so that we can have the bigger conversations?
I'm good. No, I'm
okay.
good. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Rika. I'm glad you brought that up because we get a heavy night tomorrow. So the five of us
well, we
are
can
now
still discuss tomorrow. But
we can, but we can
still
recap
discuss
tomorrow.
Somebody
yes,
might
we
go
can
home and
recap
have some
tomorrow.
questions.
And if people come up with questions before then we can have it addressed as well. The thing that I wanted to update everybody on with the affordable housing set aside with the exempt class update. So to just bring us up to speed, last February, when we modified our ETPA regulations to be buildings that are 20 or more, and we also created an exempt class that building owners that are part of ETPA can join if they are willing to put 20% of their existing units into an affordable housing program for people at the 50% area median income. And to this point, there have been conversations with one building owner, and then that building owner sold it to another building owner. And there are now 5 buildings that are being represented by council that are talking to Stuart about what that contract would look like. Because there are a lot of details to figure out. The greatest challenge is once they agree to this, then what's the timeline? What are the benchmarks that they have to meet to demonstrate that they have gotten 20% of their units to be part of the affordable housing set aside program, meaning that the people who live in those units are paying a rent that is determined by Westchester County to be equivalent to 30% of their income level for people in the 50% area median income range. And so what the first step for them would be to reach out to their current residents and say, do you think you might qualify, and try to get the qualifications from people who already live there, because it has to be set up in a way to make sure that nobody's being removed from their home to make this happen. So this is an experiment, but it's an unusual, it's the first time that this type of exempt class has been considered. The existing exempt classes that is very common is minimum size of the building, which we do have in place like many of the communities in Westchester. So the exciting thing about it is that if it happens, then there will be a very large expansion to our affordable housing program, and it'll be much more accessible, because currently units in whatever building, we've had ETPA for less than a year, so units in whatever building are at whatever the market would bear, and regardless of what your income level is. There could be people living in a building right now who are at the 50% area median income range, and they're spending over 50% of their income for that apartment. And they would now be able to, if it's their building, they would be able to apply for one of those units, and their rent would end up actually going down, because the rent will be determined by the rent guidelines of the area median income that is understood for the entire county. And the 50% area median income range was established because that's where the renters in Ossining are at, and that makes it much more accessible for people. Our current affordable housing program and most affordable housing programs, all the ones that I'm familiar with, come about when there's new construction. And ours is currently set at the 80% area median income, which for a family of 4 is like a 6-figure income. And most people in Ossining aren't even eligible for that. So the point would be to be actually creating affordable housing that is at a level that most people in Ossining would be able to access. So I just wanted to give folks an update that that Stuart is moving forward with that and actually has some buildings that are interested. He's doing some back and forth with the attorney on that to finalize what the contract will look like and then how that will unfold. We're very fortunate that our village manager is the local expert on affordable housing and can make sure that we have the right structure and support in place to be doing audits for these buildings to make sure that they are really fulfilling the obligation, which is the only reason that they can join this exempt class. So I just wanted everybody to know that that is moving forward. And when Stuart has more details, I don't have all of the buildings in front of me, but he didn't have them when we spoke earlier this week, but I wanted everybody to be to just know that that's been quiet for a while. There's been some back and forth. There's been some change of ownership, but it looks like it might actually happen for 5 buildings in Ossining. I don't have the number of units yet.
Thank you.
All right. Does anybody have anything else you want to discuss before we go into executive session?
One quick thing, I don't know if this is for now or for tomorrow, but there's been conversation about what enforcement looks like for the coronavirus guidelines. And I see what Newcastle is doing. I'm not quite sure if we want to go in that direction or do something else, but
I don't know. What is Newcastle doing?
So Newcastle is they're
looking, it's on the news, they're looking to enforce that everyone age 2 and up wear masks both on private property and public space, and there will be somewhat like a $250 fine if that is not maintained. I found it interesting that it's also on private property, not just on public spaces. So the mask wearing gets enforced, I assume, by police, because the only enforcement that you can do really is by police. Right. I found it interesting that it's 2 and up, because I work in a community center and every doctor says 2-year-olds aren't supposed to wear them. 3-year-olds are questionable. On hot days, even 3-year-olds are not. So they may want to change some of that language, but they're mulling it over, is I think the way the media is positioning it.
Yeah, that's right.
I think the 2 and up thing came from the governor, probably not a healthcare professional or a child development.
Okay, but that can be easily changed, I'm sure, when they realize that's not. But that's a minor detail. I think it's the enforcement is the big story, the headline, I think.
Well, you know, so we will have the chief with us tomorrow night. So if this is a question that you want to ask, Trustee Lopez, maybe you want to give him a heads up that, I mean, he's always prepared to discuss these things, but that, you know, find out what they're experiencing or what they would recommend as being, you know, something feasible. You know, we get a lot of mandates from the governor that and it says, okay, local authorities will take care of it. You know, how so? You know, what's reasonable? and what are they really seeing? You know, we don't want to create rules to solve a problem that's not existing. We know people are walking around without masks, but what is a solution that might actually work? And what are their interactions that they're having would be my questions for the chief.
And just to be clear, Newcastle's considering it, according to the news, not actually having done it yet.
No, I think it was a Nixle message that was sent out last week, and it was a message from the chief of police in Newcastle that came out and said that they'll be enforcing this executive order, and he'll be adding additional staff to make sure that every establishment and everybody is complying with this. So it's a little bit more than just you know, local politicians, you know, saying that they're going to be enforcing something. It was the chief of police who said that.
Okay. So are we bringing that up tomorrow? Is that what?
Yeah. So I'll email the chief to get to tee him up, let him know that we'll talk about this and to get his thoughts, and he'll give an update tomorrow, and we can discuss more tomorrow. I've also emailed you the article about Newcastle.
Yeah, I'm looking right now at the Nixles, and thank you for pointing out that was sent. Yeah, it's considered part of the disorderly conduct penal law. It's a criminal violation, up to $250 fine and 15 days in jail. So interesting.
How are they gonna do this private property thing? I find that interesting that they.
Well, you're allowed to go on. Yeah, that's people are throwing barbecues and parties. You know, I don't know if that's the building department or the police, but
Interesting.
But private property is also private businesses. You know, there's a lot of rules for, I mean, we know the rules for restaurants more than others, but there's, you know, grocery stores and retail stores that have some capability to be inside at this point too. So those are all private property too.
mm-hmm. So are senior homes, and seniors who are ill or not, and hospitals and jails. So it's again, I think it's important to discuss. We don't have to do what everybody else does. We could do a hybrid part of it. We can exclude certain things, you know, if people are interested in doing this.
Okay. All right. I definitely would want to hear what the chief has to say about what he thinks should be, you know, something that's, we don't want to create rules that can't be enforced or that aren't going to solve the problem. So if he has any suggestions on that, we'll try and give him a heads up to be, so Trustee Lopez, will you reach out to him and give him that heads up that we're going to ask him about it tomorrow night? Great. Great. So then, can I get a motion to go into executive session for matters related to personnel for specific persons?
Yes. So moved. Sorry.
So Levin moved. I have to write this down. Who can second that?
Second.
Manny.
Oh, who was that? Manny. Okay.
Manny.
Second. Quezada seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.